Welcome to Impact Pasadena, and we're delighted today to have as our guest the mayor of Pasadena, Terry Tornek. Terry was born and raised in New York, Brooklyn, in fact, and go west, young man. He went from the East Coast. He was a graduate of Princeton and Columbia Graduate School in urban planning, and after working in the East Coast for a while in Massachusetts, came out to Pasadena, where he was the planning director of the City of Pasadena for 3 years. And then after leaving public service, he went into the private sector for about 20 years. But meanwhile, he was always serving Pasadena. He was on the Planning Commission and the Design Commission. And then he stepped up to run for City Council in 2009, was reelected in 2013, and was elected the mayor of Pasadena in 2015. I'm delighted to welcome the mayor of Pasadena, Terry Tornek.
Oh, thank you. Pleased to be here.
So Terry recently, just today, in fact, unveiled the statue of Jackie Robinson at the Rose Bowl, and was telling me that he was a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers when Jackie Robinson was there. Can you tell us a little bit about that one, Terry?
Well, I mentioned in my remarks today that both my wife, Maria, and I grew up in Brooklyn, and our dads, Benedetto and Alan, took us to lots of games at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. And so Jackie was one of my childhood heroes. And Vin Scully was the MC. Don't get introduced by Vin Scully every day. And he made the point that Jackie Robinson stole home 19 times, and I was actually in attendance for one of those steals. So this was the shared Pasadena Brooklyn heritage that I have with Jackie Robinson is something I'm proud of, and it was really a wonderful event today.
Well, to put a plug in for PCC, Jackie played at PCC, and I think the statue has him in his PCC uniform.
It does, and there was much mention of PCC, and PCC's band was there, and the cheerleaders, and the fact that Jackie spent so much of his time here, his youth here, all of his youth here, effectively. Really is telling. And of course we like to identify with Jackie Robinson because he's such a symbol of progress in terms of equal opportunity in this country. And I made the point, I'm not sure everyone was pleased with the point I made, but I made the point that during his experience in Pasadena wasn't such an equal opportunity place. But I felt comfortable making those comments because I think we've come a long way, and I felt that the fact that we were dedicating another monument to Jackie Robinson in Pasadena is sort of a reaffirmation of the fact that we're determined to have equal opportunity for everyone that lives here, and so I put a plug in for Old Pasadena.
Well, he's iconic, and he really represents the heritage of Pasadena too, in all the ways that you described. So when you moved from the East Coast, what was it about Pasadena? I know you were offered a job here, but what was it about Pasadena that appealed to you, and how come you stuck around?
Well, I think I had a number of job opportunities when Maria decided we should move out here, and and the one that was most logical and most comfortable for me was Pasadena, because it had a sense of unlike a lot of the other places where we might have gone to live and work. Pasadena really had a sense of place, and people in the city were concerned about preserving things of value as opposed to just tearing them all down. And I was hired as planning director because of my experience with historic preservation, and my major task was Old Pasadena. So it was in terms of making the transition from the East Coast to California, Pasadena was a pretty soft landing in some ways.
Yeah, and to go back to that, the Old Pasadena has really been a model, I think, when it was early developed, and then through time for the country and for this kind of development of historic
I think
old
so.
towns.
And of course, the reason that I was hired is because Pasadena Heritage, which had been newly formed, and the citizens of Pasadena preempted and contradicted what the city's plan was for Old Pasadena, which was to scrape it. And so they had won that victory before I got here, and the city was ripe in terms of trying to understand how we could not just save buildings, but then redevelop them in a way that was sensitive to their architecture, but also would be viable economically, and that was the jumping off point for the Old
I
Pasadena.
love the fact too, and it's changed Old Town, but some of you,
Don't say Old Town. Don't say
don't?
Old Town. Old Pasadena. Old Town could
Pasadena.
be Monrovia.
I'm
or
trying.
something.
That's right. I guess I'm behind the times.
Oh, okay.
But one of the things I love about Old Pasadena, and I loved since I had an office there for years, was that you kept the pawn shop. You kept some of the older markers of what Pasadena was, and so
The
it's
truth is that
historic-
very few of those survived.
Yes.
The pawn shop is profitable enough where they were able to do that.
Right.
But we lost a lot of the better things that were in Old Pasadena in terms of artist lofts, for example.
Yes.
There were people, when I left the city and went to the dark side and became a developer, one of the first buildings I did was at the corner of Fair Oaks in Colorado. And the upstairs had been inhabited by artists. It was cheap housing, nobody wanted it. It wasn't very good housing, but it was inexpensive and it was well located for them, and of course that didn't survive. So I mean, there's always a trade-off when you adopt things and make changes. Nothing stays the same, and you lose some of the good stuff along with the bad stuff.
Yeah, well, it's always characteristic too. The artists kind of are the avant-garde in many ways. So I'm not going to dwell too much on your private career. I know it was very successful, and it was involved with development and housing and a lot of other issues. I know you're on the board. You were on the board of the Neighborhood Housing Services here and Planning Commission. But let's move ahead to the time when you've been in public office. And what I'd really like to do today is talk about some of your vision for the future of Pasadena in the different areas that are concerned to our residents. And I'm thinking about education and housing and a lot of other things. So rather than get too much into nitty-gritty, I'd really like to talk about how you see the future unfolding. And let's start with education. The PUSD, public education in Pasadena, has had a turbulent history. We really know about that. But there's been a lot of progress, I think, lately. I'm on the board of the Pasadena City College. We're very proud of that for all the first-generation students that we have. So what is sort of your vision around Pasadena and education?
Well, one of the things I campaigned on, one of my key platforms, both on the city council and later in my mayoral run, was the premise that we really can't have a great city without a great public education system. Yep. And Pasadena is really a unique place in a lot of ways, but educationally in the fact that there's always been a significant cohort of the kids that have gone to private schools. People think that was a result of busing. It's not true. Mm-hmm. It really antedated that, and there was always a strong history of private education in the city, and that's continued. So 40% of the kids get sent to private school here, and that poses a real challenge to the public school system, because you lose the energy and the support and other qualities that would otherwise be available to the public school system. Mm-hmm. Apart from that, the way that reimbursement is organized in the state of California really disadvantages public school systems that have a significant number of kids that need special attention, whether they're special needs children or foster children or people whose first language isn't English. And so even though there are some differentials in terms of the reimbursement rates, it isn't enough to really make them whole. Mm-hmm. And so when you combine the private education skimming, the lack of adequate financial support, and the fact that enrollments statewide are declining because there are fewer kids, mm-hmm. The PUSD is confronted with a host of challenges. And I'm committed, although public education is not part of the city government's charge, I'm committed to helping to work with them, and I've been working with an organization called Collaborate Pasadena since its inception to try and find ways in which the city government can support the children and the public school system. Because after all, the city has a great many departments and programs that serve children. The public libraries, the police department through its PAL program, the health department, and recreation, of course, parks and recreation. we invest in children, we need to be sure that we're doing that in a way that is most helpful to the public school system, relieves them of some of the burdens that they have. And also, we've this year started the Office of the Young Child that's housed in the library department. And we've done that because we understand from PUSD that if children arrive at kindergarten unprepared, it sounds silly in a way, unprepared for kindergarten, but that age period between 0 and 5 is so critical in the development of children that if they arrive at kindergarten behind the 8 ball, they, unprepared, they never catch up. And so we've got an Office of the Young Child. We've declared that Pasadena will be an early childhood city, and we're investing money and effort in that. So that we're trying to find ways to be supportive of the PUSD. I have a personal commitment because 2 of my grandchildren are enrolled there, and my son is a teacher in PUSD, and Maria was a teacher at Jefferson School. So we're very much committed to the PUSD, and I think as you see the year evolve, we're going to have some very tangible ways in which we're going to suggest we can support the PUSD.
That's great. I just on the Collaborate Pasadena too. This is a partnership with nonprofits also.
That's right.
It's a public-private partnership, which I think is so important when the municipalities or the state can't really fully step up to provide resources.
Look, we've understood for a long time, and it's very clear to me that the city can't do everything that we'd like to do to serve our residents. We don't have the resources, we don't have the skill, we're not nimble enough in some areas. There are some things we really shouldn't be involved in that private organizations are better suited to dealing with. So we have, you're right, in Collaborate Pasadena, it's not only a joint venture between the City of Pasadena and the PUSD. We've got Altadena involved, and we've got Sierra Madre involved as partners because their children go to PUSD. We've got the nonprofits, we've got parents and children, and we've got the faith-based organizations and the colleges. PUSD is involved in the PCC is involved in the effort as well. So we've tried to be inclusive and pull together organizations and individuals that have resources, all in an effort to serve the children.
Well, let's talk about another area of need and of scant resources, and that's housing. And I think housing has, when you talk about housing, there's a lot of ramifications to this. I mean, there's the affordability issues of housing for young people coming into the city. How can you live here? We want people who work here to be able to live in the community if possible. We also have issues of development that have come up in recent elections and are another issue. And then, of course, there's the homelessness that we see. So can you sort of paint a picture of where we're at with that and some of the challenges?
Well, the picture that I paint is one of tremendous challenge, and it's what you've just described is sort of describes the whole bundle of issues that we combine when we talk about housing. So just picking them off briefly one at a time. On the issue of affordability, that's a regional problem, the statewide problem, really, at least at the coastal areas of the state. And it's largely a function of supply and demand. I mean, there's no mystery to this. We're not producing enough housing to satisfy the market demand, so the prices go up. And when you have attractive places to live, like Pasadena, I mean, it's a measure of our success that people want to live here. It gets even more intense, and so the demand drives the pricing even further. So the response to that then is to build additional housing. Well, that bumps into the concerns that some people have in the city about whether we're overbuilding, and we're creating congestion to the extent that the very aspects of the city that people cherish and make them want to live here will be imperiled and lost. And we're going to create, Manhattan West. And so they're fearful that if we produce too much housing, too dense housing, that we'll lose the character of the city. In fact, it's not true because 75% of the city is not zoned for multifamily housing. It's zoned for single-family housing. And what we've done is per the general plan, we've tried to concentrate the multifamily housing in the downtown area, which is best suited to deal with higher densities. But still, when people see all these projects going up and they're approaching densities of 87 or 100 units per acre, they get worried and they start to push back. And so now you've got on the one hand, you've got the requirement of building additional housing in order to satisfy the demand, or else prices go up. But at the same time, you have people saying we ought to slow down in terms of the housing construction. And of course, there are the people who are saying, well, it's fine to build this housing, but we need affordable housing. And the new housing, of course, is the most expensive housing because it's new. And so what are we doing about affordable housing? So we have programs that try to deal with that. We have what's called an inclusionary ordinance, which means that a certain percentage of all the housing that's built has to be affordable, and that's defined. It's a defined term in terms of people who are earning average or below average incomes. But it's a small number. It's really a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
And so the response to that is, well, maybe we should put rent control on top of all this. And there's a group that's going to be out collecting signatures to support that. From my point of view, that would be the very worst thing that we could do in terms of dealing with the housing issues, because it will stop new production dead in its tracks, and it will provide disincentives for property owners to maintain their existing housing. So in spite of the fact that it's well-intentioned and on a superficial level sounds like it might be a good idea, I think it's a terrible idea. And if it does get on the ballot, I will actively campaign against it, not because I don't think people should be afforded to be able to live in Pasadena, but because I think it's adding gasoline to the flames of the housing crisis.
And I think that there are legitimate concerns on all sides, and it's just a matter of how do you sort of integrate some of these concerns to keep the quality of our city that we want. And would you agree?
We're trying to walk on a tightrope here. And search for that elusive sweet spot, of just the right amount of development where we don't lose the essence of what makes Pasadena charming, but at the same time allows us to attract new people and businesses and serve the needs of, where are our children and our grandchildren going to live?
We can't just all be a bunch of retirement community.
So I think it's a real challenge. And then, of course, the homeless issue is yet another subset of the issue. And I think that Pasadena, for a city of its size, has done a really commendable job in terms of trying to exploit every opportunity to serve the homeless and to try to get them into permanent housing with services. Because we've learned that to just house people without providing them with services that address some of the needs that had them wind up on the street
counseling,
to begin with.
Health issues.
Counseling, the employment thing, mental health counseling, and drug addiction issues, and recidivism issues, people that have criminal records. It's really this kind of cauldron of things that we're trying to deal with. And so I think, again, the city partnering with the nonprofits, and we have very capable nonprofits working in this area, really has made a difference. And the reality is that Pasadena's homeless count is flat or even declining in the face of an explosion in Los Angeles County. So that didn't happen by accident. But each of these folks that are being homeless is not a crime. And being able to meet the needs of our homeless population requires sort of one victory at a time. It's really not a one-size-fit-all solution. There is no magic wand. We need to just work at it, and we've been working at it assiduously.
Well, let me. I think it's related. Let me look at another topic, which is economic growth, economic development. I saw recently statistics that in terms of job creation, we're actually number 3 in the state among the cities, which is bravo.
Yeah.
But then, you get to wages, issues about wages. I know we had the minimum wage proposals, and then what are the industry sectors that really we can look to? We've got a lot of great resources, intellectual resources here. What are some of those sectors that we can look to for economic growth?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because one of the things that cities need to understand, like businesses, is that we occupy a space, sort of a niche in the marketplace. Pasadena is not going to be a manufacturing center, right? We virtually have no industry left in Pasadena.
Right.
But where we do have very strong opportunities are in the area of education, in the areas of hospitality, innovation, and I think that those are the areas where we really can excel, and where we are excelling. And and medicine,
Yeah, I was gonna say the
medicine and bio research. So if you look at what's happening in Pasadena, the announcements that have come rolling in education, we have PCC, which is a very strong actor and a major impact on our city's economy, and they're in a healthy place, I hope. But you can speak to that better than I can. We have the Arts Center Design College, which has talked about a master plan on South Raymond that will be absolutely transformative in terms of what happens, and represents a long-term investment on the order of $400 million. In medicine, we have a new $70 million Shriners Hospital. We have HMRI, Huntington Medical Research Institute, completing its building on Fair Oaks. We have the new Kaiser Medical School that's being built across the street virtually here. You know, these things don't happen by accident, but they're additive, they're cumulative, and they support additional investment by others in those kinds of activities.
So is that a long-term prospect, or are we going to see from things like the health center and the arts centers, are we going to see immediate revenues to the city, or is it more of a long-term?
Oh, I think it's a longer-term play.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some immediate impacts that are beneficial, but it is a longer-term play, and it's the same thing with the innovation activity and the spin-offs from Caltech and JPL that we have, and I think and of course in hospitality, again, almost across the street we have, I'm pointing in the wrong direction, we have a new hotel going up, we have 3 others in the pipeline. I mean, the virtue of all this is that these various activities and these opportunities for the city generate jobs up and down the wage scale.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, is in terms of mid-skill and low-skill jobs, there's still going to be opportunities that we see from some of these activities.
And I think that's important. I mean, so the hospitality sector traditionally has been a fairly low-wage area. And yet, within it, that's a dangerous thing to sort of paint them with that brush, because in reality, there are really high-paying jobs associated with that as well. It's not all about busboys and people cleaning rooms, although those are important jobs too, but there are executives involved, you know, and there are spin-offs from hospitality into restaurants, and I mean, it really, we have a very small and dedicated and pretty sophisticated economic development group that works in the city manager's office. They meet with local employers in various segments all the time to find out what's working and what's not and what we can improve. And we also, they get me involved in pitch meetings. I mean, we had Doheny Eye Institute announce that they're coming to the old Avery building. I was involved in multiple pitch meetings on that over an extended period of time. This stuff does not happen by accident. And we've got a staff that identifies the prospects, knows where we're strong and we can be competitive, and then goes after them. And I think that that's been a winning strategy. And
you've sort of targeted areas that you think are the best kind of prospecting.
And those are the 4 areas that I identified as being not exclusively what we can have success in, but where I think is the best place to spend our time and effort.
Kind of going with your strengths.
I think that's the plan.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned wages, and there was, we brought up the issue of minimum wage. There were dire predictions, there were optimistic predictions. What's been the result of the minimum wage changes?
Well, that depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
And I think, frankly, from a sort of an objective point of view, it's too soon to be sure. We've had continued expressions of concern and intense concern, particularly from the restaurateurs. And in fairness, we have more restaurants per capita in Pasadena than any place in the country.
Terrific restaurants.
With the possible exception of Boulder. And that number of but those restaurateurs are confronted not just with the minimum wage, which represents a significant piece of their, you know, payroll is a big piece of what it costs to run a restaurant. So that impacts them. Then they've got changes in workers' comp. They've got changes that have just passed by the legislature in terms of mandatory leave, paternity and maternity leave. They've got, they're beset with a whole series of regulatory changes. We outlawed styrofoam. So for some restaurants, that's an issue. That has been an issue. And the fact that we have so many restaurants means that there's tremendous competition. So if you're a long-term restaurateur in Pasadena, you're thinking to yourself, are these guys really after me? I mean, what have I done to deserve this? And I understand the challenge, and they're really concerned about it, and they're frantic. But in terms of your specific question on what the impact of the minimum wage is, it was a phased process. It doesn't get to $15 for another 2 years, and I think until we get to that point, and we have a look back built into the ordinance that next year we will be assessing what the impacts have been of the minimum wage. The evidence from across the country is kind of mixed, so we'll have to make our own judgment about how to proceed with it. But I think we made the right decision. We sort of goaded Pasadena along with Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, sort of goaded the state into taking action. So it's not a standalone action that we've taken, but our schedule is a little more aggressive than what was adopted by the state. So we'll just have to wait and see how that all plays out.
One of the interests that I've always had is in the arts and entertainment field, and I see some stirrings in Pasadena around this. It's interesting that I saw a statistic recently that 1/3 of the new jobs in Southern California are arts related, when you include movies and design and fashion and video games and things like that. And I wonder whether there's an opportunity in Pasadena to kind of increase some of that activity, because we've got great museums here. And in the old days, we had artists who had their studios here. I always have a fantasy of how it would be great to have artist lofts again in some of the areas that could use some development along those lines.
I think that is a little bit of a fantasy.
I
just think that the problem is that the success breeds higher expenses, and typically artists are not in a position to sustain high-cost space. In terms of the arts community, there's no question that a big part of what makes Pasadena an attractive place for people of all kinds, both in terms of businesses and residents, is the fact that we have such a vibrant arts community here. The combination of the museums, the theater activities. Look, we have a new theater group. In Parsons Knows. These things are burgeoning. They're not withdrawing.
That's right.
There's renewed activity at the Pasadena Playhouse, which is an icon of the city. In every area, it's a continued struggle. All of these activities require support by the public in terms of buying tickets, and also in terms of people's donations and philanthropy, because they're typically, as you know better than anybody, are not self-sustaining. Well, but I do recognize how critical the contribution of that segment of our community is to our overall economic health.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate very much your being with us today to talk about these issues. I think if you will stay for a few minutes, we're going to have another segment where we talk about some of the other issues and challenges that are facing Pasadena. So, Mayor Tornek, thank you so much for being here on Impact Pasadena.
Thank you.
It's been our pleasure to have you.
You're very welcome.
This program was produced by Pasadena Media for the Arroyo Channel.